My name is Claire Maddox. For 22 years I believed loyalty was enough. That if I worked hard, stayed out of office politics, and gave my best, I'd be safe. That HealthCorp Solutions, the place where I'd poured more than 2 decades of my life, would see that, would value that. I was the senior executive assistant, the one who knew where everything was, how everything worked, who everyone was. The invisible glue, some used to call me, though rarely to my face. Turns out I was wrong. They fired me with a smile, a practiced corporate smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. But what they didn't know, I still held the one thing that could undo everything. If you've ever watched your second home, the place you gave your all, become the place that shut you out, I think you'll understand what comes next. For so long, I was the quiet one in the corner office. Not the corner office, of course. That belonged to Mr. Henderson, the founder of HealthCorp Solutions. My desk was just outside his, a silent sentinel. I'd been with him from almost the beginning. 22 years. He was more than a boss, he was a mentor, I suppose. A man of principle, or so I believed. He built HealthCorp on a foundation of trust, of patient care, of ethical practice. I managed his schedule, his correspondence, his life in many ways. I knew his tells, the way he'd tap his pen when a deal was solid, the slight frown when he sensed trouble. He valued my discretion, my memory. "Claire," he'd say, "you're the only one who remembers the fine print on that old contract from '98. And I did. My mind was a repository of company history, of unspoken understandings, of quiet alliances. I never gossiped, never played the games. My loyalty was to him, and by extension to the company he'd built. After my divorce years ago now, work became my everything, my anchor. I didn't have children, and my small apartment felt empty most nights. HealthCorp, that office, it was where I felt I belonged, where I thought I was seen, even if I was quiet. Then Mr. Henderson retired. It was expected, of course. He was in his late 70s, but still a chapter closed. A heavy leather-bound chapter. His daughter Evelyn took over as CEO. She was different. Polished, ambitious, always networking. She'd grown up with the company's success, but I wasn't sure she understood its heart. Initially, things seemed fine. She kept me on. "Claire, Dad said you're indispensable," she told me, a bright, quick smile. "I'm counting on you to help with the transition." I nodded, ready to serve, as I always had. But indispensability, I learned, has an expiration date. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to shift. The morning briefings Mr. Henderson and I always had, those quiet 10 minutes to set the day, they vanished. Evelyn preferred email summaries, she said. The strategy meetings, the ones where Mr. Henderson would often turn to me and ask, "Claire, what's the historical precedent here?" I stopped getting invitations. My chair, the one I'd occupied for over a decade in those sessions, remained empty. I'd see the closed door of the main conference room, hear the muffled voices from within, and a small cold knot would tighten in my stomach. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? I wasn't a decision maker, just support. But my opinion, once quietly sought, was now quietly ignored. My access, once seamless, started to encounter soft barriers. "Oh, Evelyn's in a very important call, Claire, can it wait?" Her new, much younger assistant would chirp, someone I'd barely seen before she was suddenly guarding the CO's door. It was the little things. The casual questions I used to answer for department heads, they started going elsewhere. I was still there, still efficient, still doing my assigned tasks, but it felt like the air around me was thinning, like I was becoming transparent. I'd catch Evelyn looking at me sometimes, a quick, assessing glance I couldn't quite decipher. Not hostile, not exactly. More like appraising an old piece of furniture. Useful perhaps, but not quite fitting the new decor. The discomfort grew, a slow creeping tide. I told myself it was just the change, the new leadership style. I told myself my loyalty, my long service still meant something. I had to. Then came the day. It was a Tuesday, I remember. Overcast. The kind of gray that seeps into your bones. Evelyn's assistant called me. Claire, Evelyn would like to see you in her office. 3 p.m. Just that. No context. I felt that cold knot again, tighter this time. I walked into her office, the one that had been Mr. Henderson's for so long. It looked different. Sleeker, more modern. Less warm. Evelyn was behind her large glass desk, a file open before her. She smiled. That smile. Bright, professional, and utterly devoid of warmth. Claire, please sit. I sat. My hands were steady in my lap, but my heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. Claire, she began, her voice smooth, modulated. As you know, the company is undergoing a period of significant restructuring. We're streamlining operations, looking for efficiencies, ensuring we're positioned for future growth. She spoke the corporate jargon like a second language. I just listened. I knew, even before the words came. I knew. And as part of this process, she continued, her eyes flicking down to the file, then back to me, we've had to make some difficult decisions regarding personnel. Your role, unfortunately, has been identified as redundant. Redundant. After 22 years. Redundant. The word hung in the air, sterile and cruel. She slid a letter across the desk. A crisp white envelope. My name typed neatly on the front. This outlines the terms of your separation, she said. We're offering a standard severance package, of course, and we truly appreciate your many years of service to HealthCorp. Her voice was perfectly even, a well-rehearsed speech. She even managed a sympathetic tilt of her head, a smile, a letter. That's what it came down to. I didn't say much. What could I say? Arguing felt undignified and pointless. I just nodded, picked up the envelope. Thank you for letting me know, I managed. My voice sounded distant, even to my own ears. She seemed almost relieved by my quiet acceptance. Your personal items have been boxed up, she said, a little too brightly. They'll be couriered to your home this afternoon. We felt it would be easier that way. Easier for whom? I wondered. Easier for them not to see the face of the woman they were discarding. Easier for them not to witness 2 decades of dedication being reduced to a few cardboard boxes. My email was already deactivated. My nameplate, the simple brass one that read Claire Maddox, Senior Executive Assistant, was probably already in a bin. Erased. Like I was never there. I stood up, the letter heavy in my hand. Goodbye, Evelyn. She offered another one of those smiles. Goodbye, Claire. We wish you all the best. I walked out, past the new assistant who wouldn't meet my eye, through the halls I knew better than my own apartment. Each step felt like it was on ground that was no longer solid. 22 years. Ended in less than 10 minutes. The boxes arrived that evening as promised. 5 of them. Stacked in my small living room, they seemed to fill the entire space. Monuments to a life that had just been canceled. I couldn't bring myself to open them right away. It felt too much like sorting through the wreckage of something. I made tea, sat on my sofa, and just stared at them. The silence in the apartment was profound. For years, the hum of the office, the rhythm of HealthCorp, had been the soundtrack to my life. Now there was just this quiet, empty space. After my divorce, I'd poured everything into my work. It was my refuge, my identity. I believed that if I was loyal, if I was indispensable, I'd be safe. That the company would be loyal in return. I guess that was naive. Loyalty, it seemed, was a one-way street. A few days passed. The shock began to wear off, replaced by a dull ache, a sense of disorientation. Who was I, if not Claire Maddox of HealthCorp? I finally started going through the boxes. Old files, company memorabilia, a few sad-looking desk plants. Mostly papers. Memos, reports, archived correspondence. Things I'd meticulously organized over the years. It was like excavating my own past. In the third box, wedged between a stack of annual reports from the early 2000s and a collection of Mr. Henderson's speeches I'd helped draft, was a plain manila folder, thinner than the others. No label. I almost tossed it aside. Just another piece of corporate history. But something made me pause. Curiosity, maybe, or just the need to be thorough, a habit ingrained after so many years. I opened it. Inside, there were only a few documents. One caught my eye immediately. It was a legal document printed on heavy bond paper. The HealthCorp letterhead at the top. It was dated about 5 years prior, back when Mr. Henderson was still firmly in charge, though already contemplating his succession plan. It was a proxy, a specific limited proxy agreement. My breath caught. Not a gasp, just a pause in the rhythm of my sorrow. I read it slowly, then again. It stated in clear, unambiguous legal terms that for any termination of a senior staff member, defined as anyone with 10 years or more of service, or at director level and above, my co-signature alongside the CEO's was required. It was a measure Mr. Henderson had put in place, he told me at the time, to prevent any rash decisions during a transition, to ensure continuity and protect long-serving loyal employees. He trusted my judgment, my knowledge of the company's core people. I remembered signing it, a formality at the time. I'd filed it away as instructed and honestly forgotten about it. With his retirement and Evelyn's ascension, I'd assumed it was obsolete, superseded. Apparently not. It had no expiration date tied to Mr. Henderson's tenure. It was tied to my role, or rather, to me, Claire Maddox. Evelyn had fired me. Alone. Without my co-signature. Which meant she'd fired me illegally. A small, fragile flicker of something ignited within me. Not triumph, not yet. But a dawning awareness. I wasn't just a victim of corporate restructuring. I was a victim of a procedural and legal breach. I sat there in my quiet living room, the forgotten envelope in my hand. And for the first time since that awful Tuesday, the path ahead didn't feel entirely dark. I wasn't powerless. The discovery of that proxy changed something in me. The initial shock and grief of being fired, of being discarded so casually, began to recede. In its place, a quiet focus started to emerge. It wasn't about revenge. Honestly, that word felt too harsh, too loud for what I was feeling. It was about principle, about the rules being followed, about the truth. Mr. Henderson had put that proxy in place for a reason. He believed in fairness, in protecting the people who had helped build his company. Evelyn had ignored that. Willfully, it seemed. My first thought was to contact Arthur Jenkins. Arthur had been the CFO at HealthCorp for nearly 30 years. He'd retired about 6 months after Mr. Henderson, unable to stomach the new direction. He'd confided in me during a quiet coffee just before he left. Arthur was meticulous, a numbers man through and through, but also a man of deep integrity. If anyone would understand the implications of this, and perhaps know more about Evelyn's dealings, it would be him. I found his number in my old personal address book. My hand hesitated for a moment before I dialed. It felt like crossing a line, moving from passive sorrow to active something. Investigation? Pursuit of justice? I wasn't sure what to call it. Claire. Arthur's voice was surprised but warm. It's good to hear from you. Though I was so sorry to hear, well, you know. News traveled fast, even out of the corporate bubble. I explained calmly and concisely about the proxy. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then a slow whistle. Well, I'll be, Arthur said. She actually did it. I always knew Henrietta. That's what her father used to call her when she was being particularly headstrong. I always knew she had a ruthless streak, but to bypass a direct proxy like that, that's bold. Or foolish. He paused. Claire, when I was leaving, I had concerns about some of the financial restructuring Evelyn was pushing through. Things that didn't quite add up. She was very keen to consolidate power, to remove anyone who might question her. I documented some of it. Unofficially, of course. For my own peace of mind, I told myself. Another pause. Perhaps it's time those notes saw the light of day. We met a few days later at a quiet coffee shop, far from the downtown core where HealthCorp was located. Arthur brought a slim briefcase. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, but his eyes still had that keen analytical spark. He spread a few papers on the table between us. They weren't official company documents, but his own handwritten notes, spreadsheets he'd created on his personal laptop. He'd noticed irregularities, expense accounts that seemed inflated, consultant fees paid to newly formed companies with no clear track record, decisions made about investments that bypassed the usual review committees. She was moving fast, Claire, he said, his voice low. Too fast. And she didn't like scrutiny. Anyone who asked too many questions found themselves sidelined. Or worse. He pointed to a particular entry. This one always bothered me. A major tech platform investment. Millions of dollars. The authorization for the initial phase. It looked like her father's signature, but it felt off. He was already semi-retired then, spending most of his time at his lake house. He wasn't signing off on new multimillion-dollar ventures, not without a lot of persuasion and oversight. We started piecing things together. My knowledge of internal procedures, of who signed off on what, combined with Arthur's financial acumen and his carefully preserved notes. It was slow, meticulous work. We talked about the proxy I'd found. Arthur confirmed its legitimacy and its implications. Firing me without adhering to it wasn't just an oversight, it was a clear breach. But as we dug deeper into Arthur's files, a more disturbing pattern began to emerge. It wasn't just about my termination anymore. It was about a potential pattern of misconduct, of financial manipulation. And then Arthur mentioned the signatures again. Evelyn had access to her father's signature stamp, of course, for routine matters. But some of these approvals, they required a live signature. And I'm telling you, Claire, some of them, I'm not a handwriting expert, but they made me uneasy. Forged signatures. The thought hung in the air. If Evelyn had forged her father's signature on major financial commitments, or even on documents that facilitated her consolidation of power, that was a different level of wrongdoing. It was fraud. My own wrongful dismissal suddenly felt like a small part of a much larger, uglier picture. I was no longer just wounded. I was focused. This wasn't about getting my job back. This was about uncovering the truth, whatever it might be. The quiet work, the sifting through details, the patient piecing together of a puzzle. It felt familiar. It was what I had always done. Only this time I was doing it for myself. And perhaps, for the integrity of the company Mr. Henderson had tried to build. The HealthCorp annual gala. It was always a lavish affair. A night for the company to pat itself on the back, to impress clients and stakeholders. I'd organized more than a dozen of them over the years. Knew every detail, from the seating charts to the wine selection. This year, of course, I wasn't invited. I was supposed to be a ghost, a forgotten employee. But as the date approached, an idea began to form in my mind. Quiet, insistent idea. What if I went? Not to make a scene. Not to shout or accuse. Just to be there. To be seen. Arthur had managed to get me an invitation through an old contact. Someone still on the board who owed him a favor and was perhaps, like Arthur, a little uneasy about Evelyn's reign. He didn't ask questions, just secured the ticket. The night of the gala, I chose my dress carefully. A simple, elegant dark blue sheath. Understated. Professional. My light brown hair, usually tied back, I wore down, framing my face. I wanted to look like myself. Calm, composed. I arrived a little late, after most of the guests were already inside, mingling in the grand ballroom of the city's finest hotel. I walked in alone.
No dramatic entrance.
I just appeared. I saw a few familiar faces turn, eyes widening in surprise. Whispers started, I could feel them, like a ripple spreading through the room. I didn't seek anyone out. I just moved slowly along the perimeter, observing. It was strange being on the outside looking in, at an event I had once orchestrated from the inside. And then I saw Evelyn. She was holding court near the main stage, laughing a little too loudly, a champagne flute in her hand. She looked radiant, confident. The successful CEO. Someone, a former colleague who still dared to be friendly, must have alerted her to my presence. Her head turned. Her eyes scanned the room and then they found me. For a split second, her smile froze. Just a flicker so quick most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. I saw the surprise, then the flash of something else. Annoyance? No, it was more than that. It was apprehension. Her composure returned almost instantly, the practiced smile back in place. But her eyes kept darting towards me. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. I just met her gaze, held it for a moment, a calm, steady look.
No acquiescen. No anger.
Just presence. I was there. I was not erased. I was not forgotten. I stayed for about an hour. Spoke to a few people who cautiously approached me, offering polite, if somewhat awkward, greetings. I kept my responses brief, pleasant. I wasn't there to make trouble. I was there to remind Evelyn that I existed, that the past doesn't always stay buried. The power of that silent confrontation was palpable. I could feel it. She knew. She didn't know what I knew or what I might do, but she knew something was coming. Something that wouldn't be loud, wouldn't be histrionic. Something that would be as quiet and deliberate as my presence in that ballroom. As I left, slipping out as unobtrusively as I had arrived, I felt a sense of calm. The first step had been taken. The whispers from the past were no longer just whispers. They were taking shape. And for the first time I saw a flicker of unease in Evelyn's eyes. My quiet revenge, if you could call it that, had begun. Not with a bang, but with a look. With the simple, undeniable fact of my being there. The gala was a turning point. Evelyn's brief, unguarded reaction confirmed what Arthur and I suspected. She had things to hide. Her unease fueled our resolve. We now focused on the suspicions Arthur had about forged signatures, particularly concerning that major tech investment project he'd flagged. It was a multimillion-dollar deal, one that would significantly reshape HealthCorp's future. If corners were cut, if authorizations were falsified, the consequences could be severe. We needed more than Arthur's notes and my institutional memory. We needed concrete proof. This is where things got more formal. I decided to consult a lawyer. Not a bulldog litigator, but someone methodical and discreet, recommended by Arthur. Her name was Ms. Albright. Calm, intelligent, with eyes that missed nothing. I laid out everything. My wrongful termination, the proxy, Arthur's concerns about financial irregularities, and the suspicion of forged documents. She listened patiently, asked pointed questions. When I mentioned the tech investment and the questionable signatures for its authorization, her interest sharpened. If Evelyn Henderson falsified her father's signature, or any other senior executive's signature, on documents authorizing significant capital expenditure or strategic commitments, Ms. Albright explained, her voice even, that's not just an internal policy violation. That's potentially corporate fraud. It's a serious breach of fiduciary duty. It could even have criminal implications depending on the specifics. Ms. Albright, with our input, initiated a careful, targeted investigation. It involved forensic accounting and handwriting analysis. Took time. Weeks turned into a couple of months. It was a period of quiet tension. I tried to maintain a normal routine, but my thoughts were constantly circling back to HealthCorp, to Evelyn, to the potential unraveling. Arthur and I spoke regularly, sharing scraps of information, bolstering each other's resolve. He felt a sense of duty to Mr. Henderson's legacy, and I felt a duty to the truth. Then Ms. Albright called. Claire, Arthur, I think we have it. We met in her office. She laid out the reports. The forensic accountants had traced the flow of funds for the tech project, finding discrepancies that aligned with Arthur's initial concerns, payments authorized under questionable circumstances. But the smoking gun was the handwriting expert's report. Several key authorization documents, including the one for the initial multimillion-dollar outlay for the tech platform, bore signatures purporting to be Mr. Henderson's. The expert concluded, with a high degree of certainty, that these signatures were not genuine. They were forgeries. Skilled perhaps, but forgeries nonetheless. Likely traced or meticulously copied. Signed, but not by his hand. Evelyn had pushed through a massive, company-altering investment using falsified authorizations. She had violated company law, betrayed the trust placed in her, and exposed HealthCorp to significant risk. The cold satisfaction I felt wasn't a cheer. It was a quiet affirmation. The truth had a way of emerging, even from under layers of corporate polish and deceit. Ms. Albright discussed our options. We could go to the board, present the evidence. We could alert regulatory authorities. Or we could file a lawsuit. Your wrongful termination, Claire, she said, is the entry point. But the evidence we've uncovered regarding the fraudulent authorizations broadens the scope considerably. This isn't just about one employee anymore. This is about the governance of the company. I looked at Arthur. He nodded slowly. This was bigger than my job. It was about accountability. It was about ensuring that the company Mr. Henderson had built wasn't corrupted from within. So we filed a lawsuit. Not a noisy public campaign designed to destroy HealthCorp. That was never my intention. The company, despite everything, had been my professional home for over 2 decades. The lawsuit was specific. It detailed my wrongful termination based on the violation of the proxy agreement, and it presented the evidence of Evelyn's fraudulent actions in relation to the tech investment, alleging gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. It was a direct challenge to Evelyn's leadership and her ethics. The story had turned. It was no longer just personal, a story of one woman's dismissal. It had become moral, a fight for the integrity of an entire organization. The quiet one in the corner office was no longer quiet. She was speaking through the measured, powerful language of the law. The legal process is rarely swift or dramatic, not like you see in movies. It's a slow grind of filings, depositions, and discoveries. But our case, as Ms. Albright had predicted, was strong. The evidence was clear, meticulously gathered. The forged signatures on the tech investment authorizations were undeniable. My own wrongful termination, a clear breach of the proxy Mr. Henderson had put in place, was the initial pillar, but Evelyn's broader misconduct became the central issue. There were attempts by HealthCorp's lawyers, Evelyn's lawyers, to dismiss the case, to settle quietly, to make it go away. But we held firm. This wasn't about a payoff for me. It was about accountability. My deposition was an experience. Hours in a sterile conference room, facing a team of opposing counsel. They tried to paint me as disgruntled, a relic of the old guard unable to adapt to new leadership. But I just stuck to the facts. Calmly, clearly, I recounted my 22 years of service, the circumstances of my dismissal, the discovery of the proxy, and what Arthur and I had uncovered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I just presented the truth piece by piece. There's a certain power in quiet, unshakable facts. The case eventually moved towards a hearing. It wasn't a full-blown public trial in a packed courtroom, more of a series of judicial reviews and presentations of evidence before a judge. But the weight of it was immense. Arthur testified, his detailed notes and recollections painting a clear picture of Evelyn's methods. The handwriting expert presented their findings. The forensic accountants showed their damning spreadsheets. Through it all, I sat with Ms. Albright, composed, watching the truth unfold. Evelyn was there too, of course. Her confidence seemed brittle now. The polished CEO facade was cracking. She looked stressed, defensive. The silent power I'd felt at the gala was now amplified by the weight of irrefutable evidence. The judge's preliminary ruling came down hard. Pending a full investigation by regulatory bodies, which our lawsuit had triggered, Evelyn Henderson was to be suspended as CEO of HealthCorp Solutions. The court found sufficient evidence of misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty to warrant immediate action to protect the company's interests. It was a stunning blow to her carefully constructed image. The board of directors, faced with the judge's ruling and the mounting evidence, had little choice but to comply. An interim CEO was appointed. I had one. Legally, certainly. Morally, I felt vindicated. Emotionally, it was complex. There was a sense of relief, of course. Justice, in its quiet, methodical way, had been served. But there was no elation, no desire to gloat, just a profound sense of closure. Ms. Albright informed me that as part of the resolution, the company would offer me a significant settlement for my wrongful termination, and there was even talk of offering me my old position back, or a similar senior role, under the new interim leadership. They wanted to signal a return to stability, to integrity. I thought about it. For a day or two. The idea of returning, of reclaiming my place, had a certain appeal. But then I realized my healing wasn't there, in that office, in that company. My fight had been about truth and accountability, not about reclaiming a desk or a title. I had proven my point. I had refused to be erased. I had ensured that Mr. Henderson's legacy, the ethical foundation he tried to build, wasn't entirely dismantled by his daughter's ambition and deceit. That was enough. I politely declined the offer to return. My journey with HealthCorp was truly over. The quiet trial had ended, and with it a long, painful chapter of my life. Peace, I found, was a quieter victory than I could have imagined. I didn't go back to the job. I didn't want the title. I wanted truth. And I got it. Some victories aren't loud. Some justice isn't public. It just arrives when you know who you are and you refuse to be erased. The company, HealthCorp, it's still there. Under new leadership now, trying to rebuild trust. Evelyn, well, she faced further investigations, and her career in that sphere was effectively over. As for me, I found a different path. Consulting for smaller businesses, helping them build ethical frameworks. It's quiet work, but it's meaningful. If you've ever been pushed aside, not because you failed, but because you were inconvenient, this story was for you. It took time, patience, and a belief in the quiet power of truth, but dignity isn't something they can take from you if you refuse to let it go. You reclaim it piece by piece. Leave a comment if you've been through something like this. I read every one. It helps to know you're not alone. And if you found a piece of yourself in my story, hit subscribe. We share more like this every week, stories of quiet strength and resilience. You can also support the channel with super thanks, because sometimes giving back, even in small ways, is part of healing too. Thank you for listening.